Hello and welcome to Project Hospital. I'm Plastic Swans, and in this series I'm developing my hospital based on real healthcare planning guidelines and ideas. Last episode I started developing the emergency care department. In today's episode I'm expanding upon that, as well as introducing radiology rooms. So from the last episode I got some great feedback about how the build's going. I'm genuinely surprised how many people are actually interested in this build. I've had the idea of putting together a realistic hospital for a while, and I kind of shrugged it off as I wasn't sure there'd be any interest in it. So those of you that have commented, thank you very much for that. I read every comment I get, and the comments do influence my next steps. In particular, one comment on the last video, that was from a health professional no less. That was about the layout of urgent care. Now, I'd planned for the observation ward to be on an upper level. However, as this viewer pointed out, the observation ward in the game is kind of equivalent to A&E minors, and the trauma centre is equivalent to A&E majors. So although they're two different wards, it makes sense to have them close together on the same floor. Now, the observation ward looks after patients that may need more than a couple of hours of care, but they may not necessarily need admittance to the hospital. I hadn't really thought about this clearly when planning out the layout in the last episode, so I've factored this in, and the first thing I've built in this episode is 2 4-bed observation wards next to the trauma centre. This means they're close to the ambulance entrance and the trauma unit, so close by for patients that might be coding, or patients that are stabilised that can be transferred over to the observation ward. This makes a lot more sense, so thank you very much for that comment, and you can see here how it's actually helped shape the build. Now, putting the observation ward on the ground floor, one thing I thought was still really important was to consider the privacy and dignity, as well as the environment of the ward itself. So I wanted to make sure there was windows in there so that you've got some natural light. That really helps to keep a good healing environment. But obviously it brings up the issue of privacy and dignity because there's a big window there and it's on the ground floor. So what I've done here is I've just got this little garden at the back, which is kind of with a large hedge so that you can't actually see into the hospital windows. I've also tried to make the ward look realistic, so there's a bathroom in each of the wards, and it's in a 4-bed layout. From wards I've seen recently, they try not to make them bigger than 4 people per ward, because otherwise there's just too much going on, it's too noisy. This is a little bit more realistic than cramming in loads of beds, which I could do. It's just this layout's giving the patients plenty of space, and they should all be as comfortable as they can be in this environment. This little space in between the wards, I've added another nurses station and a doctors on call unit. That's so that there's separate nurses and doctors dedicated to the observation ward, and that's separate from the doctors and nurses stations that I've put already in the trauma unit. With the addition of these observation wards, that's the whole of the A&E department now set up and ready to go. So after completing the emergency department, one thing I wanted to think about was how patients will flow through the rest of the hospital. So if you can imagine, somebody comes in, they're sent through A&E, they're put in the observation ward, and then they may have to transfer to somewhere else. What I'm trying to do is keep the flow of patients that have come through from A&E separate to those that have come through from one of the outpatient departments. So the first step for this, I've set up some elevators here that are dedicated purely to the A&E department. This will easily be able to transfer patients from A&E up to the upper floor wards. Now this actually brings up my biggest gripe with the game. There's no stairs. And like in a construction project, you absolutely need stairs. I mean, I know it's a game and all, but I think the developers could have added a model for stairs. In an emergency situation, like if a fire broke out, the elevators would be turned off automatically and you would have to use emergency stairs to get out. But with no stairs in the game, I can't model that. Hopefully this is something that can be added at a later date, maybe with future updates of the game. What I wanted to set up after this is the next logical clinical pathway, and for me that's the radiology department. Now, setting out the radiology department has been really fun because there's other aspects other than the clinical care that you have to think about. And that's to do with the construction logistics and also protecting people when you're setting up the rooms. So in the radiology department, radiation is used for imaging, which allows clinicians to see inside the body. Now, the radiation doses used in radiology are pretty low, It's not that much more of a dose than we're all getting on a daily basis from background radiation in the environment. So they're generally harmless for patients, but there is a duty of care to keep doses as low as reasonably practical, including the public and the clinical staff working in the department day in, day out. Someone getting an X-ray every now and again isn't an issue. It's the staff's potential exposure to many doses over the thousands of scans they may perform every year. That's more of a problem. So protection is put in place with how the rooms are built. All barriers around the equipment, so walls, floors, doors, windows, even ceilings, they're reinforced with radiological shielding. So things such as lead-lined walls, lead lining protective glass. This prevents radiation penetrating through the barriers. That's why when getting a scan, the clinicians will position the patient for the scan. Then they'll move into a different room that's protected to take the image. Something else I've considered in the build of radiology here is the equipment itself. Now, in real life, equipment like CT scanners and MRI machines, these are really big pieces of kit that are built by specialist companies, then it's shipped to site for installation. They are highly sensitive pieces of equipment that need very careful handling to put in place. The sheer size and weight of these machines means they're not easy to install. You have to consider how you're going to get them into the room in the first place, and then how you're going to ensure that the floor can bear the weight. That's why a lot of these things are built on the ground floor, because it's a lot easier to have a load-bearing ground floor than trying to make the upper floors handle the weight. That's why in this build, I've got the big radiology equipment in rooms on the outside wall. What you do in real-life construction would be to build the room as much as possible so it's free of contamination such as dust and debris that could affect the equipment. Then you take down the entire outside wall, give the room another deep clean, lift the equipment in place through the open wall, and then protect the equipment whilst building the outside wall back up. It's literally easier to take down an entire wall than try and get that equipment through corridor space. Smaller equipment, like such as that needed for taking X-rays, that isn't such an issue as it's small enough to get through the corridors without too much fuss. Now, how I've set up radiology here is also for clinical reasons. I've deliberately placed radiology on this side of the hospital so it can be accessed by those coming from outpatient departments via this long corridor I've got going down one side of the building, and it has a separate access for inpatients via the semi-private A&E corridor, which leads to those elevators as well. That'll make it easier, so if there's somebody coming from one of the wards up on the floors above, it'll be easy for them to get a scan without having to go through the public areas. I've squeezed in the staff break area in this tiny corner over here. That's not very realistic. The staff break room for the radiologist, that would be probably more central in the hospital, but I am really running out of space as well with the size that we're given in the game, so I'm just trying to squeeze these departments in where I can. Something else you'll notice I've added here is that I've separated the waiting area from the corridors that lead to the various imaging rooms. This isn't strictly necessary for the game, but if we're mimicking real life, I've got this little corridor here with some dressing space and some lockers. That's because for some of these scans, you are going to need to take off some of your clothing, and what they do is they'll provide obviously a private space for you to put the gown on or whatever, and they give you locker space so that you can put your personal belongings in there because you can't take it in with you. So for example, the MRI machine, that uses really powerful magnets, so you have to take off anything magnetic and you need somewhere to store that. This is just replicating how real hospitals look after your privacy, your security and your safety. And that's pretty much where I'm up to so far. We've got the whole of radiology in, we've got the whole of A&E department in. Join me next week when I'm going to be putting in some of the other departments and linking that up to both A&E and into radiology. I also need to put in the labs, which are going to be on the ground floor as well. So that's going to be a real struggle to see if I can fit all this in. Let me know in the comments what you think of this so far. And with that, I will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.